Good day, everyone. Let me get started with part two of four. If you've not watched part one, feel free to go and watch part one anytime. There are pieces of information that I will talk about and I'll talk about it as though you've already watched part one. So I'm not catching up anyone here. I'm going to recap, but there's lots of pieces to the puzzle um, and there's information that I won't be bringing into these other pieces of these other parts. That said, let me go ahead and get started. I'm going to say just a brief word of prayer. I've already prayed earlier, and I'm just going to pray now that I have you here. All right, Father in heaven, we thank you for this opportunity, and I simply ask again to be with me as I am trying to present truth. Father, I ask that you give us your early and latter rain. We ask in the name of your Son. Amen. Okay. All right, let's get started. If you've watched my program before, you have recognized this slide. And this slide is what we've presented as the National Sunday Law Blueprint. And you'll hear me say that in part one. Now, I want to talk about part one just for a moment as a review. And we started off, I tried to explain to you what imperialism is, and then I went through different ages of the world and basically starting from the very beginning of this separation of God's um, government is when Lucifer was in heaven and he was rebelling against God's government and he started his own government and we call that politics, and that politics always leads into war. So that started the second government people can choose from. Then there's the flood and the Tower of Babel, Babylon, and so on. Then we talk about how the Puritans came over. We had um, the United States of America. We took a deep dive in the Department of Labor, Project 2025, which is going to become part of this government, it looks like. So we wanted to look at what this government is going to take a bite out of, so to speak. And then we looked at the Bible again. We also took a look at the four stages of the National Sunday Law. And I want to set the stage up as we get going. So that's going to be part one. I've got 6 points I want to make in this presentation. Setting up the stage, I want to first introduce to you this is who I'm going to talk about today. I wanted to go ahead and give you all four players. We've got the King of the North, King of the South, False Prophet, and the Faithful Servants. And there's different names that these entities go by depending on the um, code word in the book of Daniel or the book of Revelation. So it's written in code. And the reason why it was written in code, people wonder, the reason why it was written in code is because, look, if the enemy gets a hold of your war plans or your letters, you don't want them to sift through and destroy your plans. So they may come up with alternative plans and plant those plans in the hands of the people, and the people think this is uh, what the plans are, but the real plans still exist. And so that's how he worked through it. And that is what it is. Okay. So the King of the North has other names, and each one of these entities has their own study. So if you want the study individually, let me know, and you can reach out at our email address, and that will be at the end of the presentation. But based on the studies that we know about, the King of the North is also called the Roman Catholic Church, the first beast of Revelation, and the religious or political religio entity. And the first beast is referencing in the book of Revelation, and then the King of the South. There's some isms there. We're going to talk about them as well. False prophet, the second beast of Revelation, we're talking about Revelation there. And the second beast is the false prophet. And we believe that to be the United States of America, where I am from. And then we also would call that prostate Protestantism. And then they're the faithful servants of God. They keep the commandments of God. They have always been an irritant to the king of the north, king of the south, as well as they keep the commandments of God, all the commandments of God, even the ones that you really haven't realized, and I haven't realized. Um, that were actually commands of God. And they have the faith of Jesus or Yeshua. And the faith of Jesus really is the spirit of prophecy, the book of Revelation tells us. So the spirit of prophecy. Prophecy. I want to introduce to you the real King of the North and his house. This is the sanctuary that God had told Moses to build in the wilderness, and they did. The courtyard, that is a symbolic, uh, uh, that's symbolic of the earth and Jesus's ministry on earth, where there's the altar of burnt offerings. That's where the sacrifices went. So that represents the earth and where Yeshua actually was killed. The laver, you can study that, and there's a lot of meanings to that. That could mean the firmament between heaven and earth. That also is symbolic of the um, baptism of Yeshua, where he came through and came and get baptized. So there's lots of things there. There's more too. Then there's the holy place. You can see there is a arrow there. I want you to pay attention to that. That piece of furniture was built with two crown edge, a rim around it. And that was two crowns because it is actually a throne. It is symbolic of a throne, the throne in heaven. Well, there's two stacks of bread for the Father and Son. And then we believe that his ministry in heaven, at least in the holy place, is finished, and he has moved to the Holy of Holies. So some people think that he's still ministering in the holy place, but there's a large group around the world that believes that he has started ministering in the Holy of Holies. And let me tell you, there's no other room for him to go and minister in. Once he's finished with that, and that's where judgment takes place. And once he's finished with that, he can't do anything but come out. And where is he coming out to? He's going to come out and go right back through the laver to come through the firmament and come to earth and come get his people. So that's exciting. That's exciting. But the main takeaway from this is I want you to, there was a lot of good information there, but the takeaway for this study is that piece of article, if you see the position, it is positioned to the north. And the real King of Kings and Lord of Lords and the King of the North is the Son of God. And that is the title that the enemy has been taking for himself. So, the false king of the north and king of the south, world history. So, we're going to go through history really quick. In Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of this statue right here. Now, he tried to defy prophecy. He did not have the spirit of prophecy in his heart. And so he had to defy it. He defied it by making an image like his dream, but he made a real image made out of all gold. And that's where you get your story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego bowing, having been thrown into the fiery furnace. And so that famous fiery furnace story is because of Nebuchadnezzar defying prophecy, denying it. But in his dream, he did come around, by the way, after 7 years of in the wilderness. But in the dream in chapter 2, he was told he is the head of gold. So that's Babylon. And then two kingdoms, you see those two arms, two kingdoms, the Medes and the Persians, they were weaker than Babylon, just like silver is weaker than gold. And they got together and they conquered the head of gold. Well, you can see also the lion and the bear. That's your, other chapters in Daniel. But we're mostly looking at the statue, which is Daniel 2. And then you've got your belly and thighs of brass. That's your Alexander the Great. And so he was very tough to the core and very strong, very strong. And you've got your legs of iron. And I want you to notice there's two legs, just like there's Medes and the Persians, two arms, there's two legs. So who do those represent? That represents your 1260 years of pagan Rome and your 1260 years of papal Rome. And papal Rome, that supremacy, that imperialistic system, received a deadly wound in 1798. And we talked a little bit about that with the French Revolution. But then when you get to the feet, you've got clay and iron. And I'm going to tell you, folks, clay and iron do not mix. They just don't mix. And so that, and the other point I want you to take away is the iron never goes away. That means pagan Rome and papal Rome will not go away until that rock without hands, cut without man's hands, actually comes. And that's the second coming of Yeshua. Now, I want to talk about this. There were four generals that were of Alexander's army, and he did not have an heir. So when he died of alcoholism, when he died, the um, the four winds, right? The four winds, the four corners were divided. So north, south, east, west, and these are his generals. There was Ptolemy of the south, Lysimachus of the north, Seleucus of the east, and Cassandra of the west. And when you look at how the next 40 years, give or take, went between these four generals, Ptolemy were the Ptolemies of Egypt. Those were the king of the south. And then Cassandra lost a battle to Lysimachus. Lysimachus lost a battle to Seleucus. And so it then ended up being two kings, the king of the north, king of the south. But I want to tell you about a rule of the titles, King of the North, King of the South. So the titles are going to remain intact. So let's say you are the King of the North and I conquer you. Doesn't matter where I live. I now inherit, I now claim the title King of the North. I can move around wherever, but I have the title, the King of the North. And so you're going to see in history lots of fighting back and forth, back and forth. And the geography does not dictate um, everything. So I can live wherever, just like I said, I can live wherever and have that King of the North title because I conquered you. And then you're going to start to see that the really now the whole world is falling into line under one of these two kings in modern times. So let's get started. I'm going to show you this. Um, oh, you know what? There it is. I skipped over this one. So you can see there was King of the North, King of the South. Okay. All right. Now you can see this grid, and in the middle column, you're going to see the word power. And in Daniel chapter 11, I went verse by verse and I gave you a brief summary of events, but each one of these is going to be a study in its own self. So much history there, we don't have time. The takeaway I really want you to have from this slide and the next two is that this one and the next one is that the power is willing. These powers, the king of the north, king of the south, are willing to unite. You could see in verse 6, there was an alliance between the two when the son and daughter married. And then you can see where the king of the KOS is king of the south is in power. So who's in power in these verses? That's going to help you see who's in power. Then you see there was a 14-year peace in verse 13. Well, until the king of the south dies. When the king of the south dies, there was a new king that was age 4 or 5. And when that happened, well, because his youth, the people around him tried to protect him, but it really did uh, not do any good because the king of the north then won in verse 15. So he they took down the king of the south. Okay, and I will say that in the verses 17 and 22, there's a lot of history there. Did not have time to go through all of this. We know a lot of the history with Cleopatra the Seventh. Cleopatra the Seventh is the famous Cleopatra we all know. Julius Caesar of Rome, Augustus Caesar, Tiberius Caesar. So all of those, that's history. Now, I want to talk about the King of the South for a moment. How are you? What is their mentality like? Who are they? What do they like? And how are we going to recognize that mentality today? And it's not necessarily a mentality. Okay. So I know that these are um, entities still, but I want to look at their almost like a personality. You know how a company has a personality or a church has its own personality. Well, so does the King of the North, King of the South personality in how they relate to the living God. And so when you look at Ramses II, Cleopatra the Seventh, they had a lot of gods, but they denied the living God. And that's what set them apart. So in this book called The Great Controversy, and if you don't have that book, you need to get that book before you can't get that book. The Great Controversy, there on page 269, it says that talking about Egypt, this is atheism, and the nation represented by Egypt would give voice to a similar denial of claims of the living God, and would manifest a like spirit of unbelief and defiance. So the King of the South. So what you're going to see is the King of the South has a spirit about it that is in defiance of the living God. And then we see this in Exodus 5:2, where it says, "And Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? Who let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go." So, this type of mentality you could see in your communism, your Marxism, your fascism. But I know fascism and all can be seen in other ways as well. So remember the isms can be shared. Now, I want to talk about in 321 AD, Constantine. Um, Constantine, he was, well, we know he was young and well, I mean, I think that what I really want to say is he was pagan. He was pagan, and he would put churches on one corner and a pagan chapel, if you want to call it a chapel, on another corner. So he merged Christians with pagans, and he wanted the sun to be worship. So this is where you start to see sun worship coming into the church. He made a law in 321, and it says the magistrates and the people residing in the cities should rest and the workshops should close. So this is what we know to be the first Sunday law. But that didn't stop there. Pope Sylvester. Pope Sylvester also attacked a day. We're going to talk about that day in a moment. Um, but he promoted Sunday. He promoted Sunday. There's your sun again. And so to give reverence to Sunday, Pope Sylvester said, I really do like how the Jews and the Christians who keep the Sabbath, I really like how they keep the Sabbath holy. And it is called the Lord's Day, but I'm going to move that phrase, Lord's Day, from Sabbath, which was Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, still is, to the day of the sun. And so he gives further reverence to the sun. So basically, what I'm saying is this. In part one, you see how Project 2025 wants to reverence Sunday, and they are pacifying Sabbath keepers, trying to at least, which is something they did not do in 1888. Remember that from part one. And so this is simply going all the way back to the early Christians where the Sabbath was attacked again for the first time. Um, well, not necessarily the first time, but it's attacked by Christians or people that are calling themselves Christians. And so this is early on, early on. And this is not to be a surprise because Paul even said that uh, we that Jesus can't come back until a falling away happens first. And so after the cross, there was a falling away, and that's kind of that's 2 points that I told you moments ago. So, looking at the King of the North under Constantine, we talk about Constantine removed the seat of his empire from Rome to Constantinople. Now, what this does is it actually gives the Bishop of Rome more power. He puts Rome in power, the power of Rome in the bishop's hands. So, the Bishop of Rome and so the city of Rome was given up to the bishop who in 538 became the head of the churches. So again, we're seeing how the apostolic time where the apostles of Christ, that way of doing things is now changing early on in the first centuries. Okay, then we are told in this book that was written in 1888, which again was a significant year if you looked at part one. This Rome became the seat of the papacy, and the authority of the Pope was derived from the decree of the dragon power. And it's interesting how 2024, right before 2025, is the year of the dragon, if you're into that. And what I want to show you is if you see that in the north arrow on the side, these slides, if they have north or south, this is to help you to see who's in power for those verses. So Daniel 11, 29 through 30, the king of the north is in power. And so Clovis got involved in 508 AD. Clovis, a Frank, got his French army, the Frank, got his French army, and he helped the Bishop of Rome defeat the Arians and a couple of others. But the significance of this is it was a French person. Um, so it was French, and that's going to come into play in a moment. So a grand crisis is ripening between pagan Rome and papal Rome, right? So papal Rome wants to defeat pagan Rome. They're trying to take over. They do a they do a good job. Papal Rome succeeds, and there's your transition. And so then papal Rome waged its first war against the civil and the Church of the East, and then papal Rome exterminates 65,000 heretics, who they call heretics. Now, remember I said 508, and all of the activity going on in the 500s. Well, this time frame starts a significant prophetic period, and that is the 1260 years of dark ages, right? We know the dark ages, we heard of the dark ages. Well, this was 1260 years. Remember, I told you it was 1260 years of pagan, 1260 years of papal. Well, here you go. And it ends in 1798. And remember when I said that the French helped the Bishop of Rome, win? And that started the 1260 years. Funny thing, I don't see as a coincidence. Funny thing, oh, and there, let me tell you, there's some verses there, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Um, the King of the South ends up being the French. The French. So I just wanted to finish that thought for a moment, but go back here and look at this yellow box. There's verses there that tell you how to figure up the 1260 years. So a time, you see in Daniel 7:25, a time is 1 year. Times is 2 years. And a half of a time is half of 1 year, which is 6 months. And when you're counting the months, the days in the months are going to be 30, not 31, not 30, 29. It's going to be 30. And I'm sorry. Well, that's true for the 42 months. True for the 42 months. But the year, I meant the year, it's going to be 360. It's not going to be 365. Okay. It's not going to be 365. That's the Gregorian, that's the pagan. But in a Hebrew year, it's 360 days or 30 days in a month. So depending on which verse you're looking at, that's how you're going to count. Then we know that a day is for a year in Ezekiel and Numbers, a couple of verses there. And then you can see that if you add up all of that, it's going to be 1260. So that's how that actually is calculated. Now, back to this. So it's funny, the French actually help um, the King of the North get power. But then during this time, the French becomes the king of the South because they're warring and they become the king of the South. And then they squash the king of the North in 1798, which is the first part of Daniel 11:40. And it says, and at the time of the end shall the king of the South push at him. Well, the time of the end, we know, remember, is 1798. So 1798. And what's significant with 1798? Well, Napoleon's general, General Berthier, there's a replica of a painting. General Berthier takes Pope Pius into captivity and he dies in captivity. He was there about, I don't know, 18 months or so. And I do want to just introduce there, you could see the map just covering some words. That's okay. And it basically says triple war. And so there's a study out there that says, well, the King of the North is really Turkey. And so I am only putting this slide here to acknowledge to those who have that study, um, and just acknowledging that that study exists. And but this, what I'm going over is going to put Rome as the King of the North. So this is this study. Okay. So that's all that is just recognizing I am aware of that study out there that says the King of the North is someone else. But in this case, this study, the King of the North is going to be the papacy. Now, the King of the South has power. And let me read these two Revelation 13 passages. They're out of order, but it's on purpose. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast. Okay, that's talking about the deadly wound that the King of the South gave to the King of the North. So the King of the South has power, and in that power, he he gave that deadly wound to the King of the North. Now, who was this? Again, I'm saying that when you do your lineage of history, it was the French who, through Napoleon and General Berthier, took the Pope out of commission. Took the Pope out of commission. And what was removed? Temporal power, because during that 1260 years, the Catholic Church, the Vatican, had power over the civil government as well as the religious entity. So they had it was a religio-political entity, remember, diverse from the others. And then 1310 says, and he that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with a sword must be killed with a sword. So this is how we understand these verses. Okay. Now, more on the King of the South. There was the reign of terror. I see as some little formatting is off, and that's okay. So the reign of terror happened during the French Revolution. And after the papacy, treated God, God's people, and their salvation as mere property. The French, King of the South, was disgusted and they said, you know what? If this is what Christianity is, we really don't want it. And that's whenever General Berthier marched into the Vatican, took him off his throne, put him in prison. He took him back to France, put the Pope into prison, and and this was the end of the 1260 years. All right. Now, the papacy had created millions of martyrs. I mean, a conservative number is 50 million, and that's a lowball number you learned from part one during those 1260 years. Just a lowball number. Well, the French had gotten rid of the monarchy. Now, listen, the French had gotten rid of the monarchy, and the French had gotten rid of the papacy. That's exactly what the Puritans did. The Protestants, okay, I'm just putting this out here. We're going to go into it in a moment. The Protestants, what did they do? They got rid of the monarchy and they got rid of the papacy. And they came here. And we touched on that in part one. So when the French Revolution came and they kicked out the Christians, they burned the Bibles, and it was just terrible, terrible. It was just a reign of terror. Well, they ended up making a committee of public safety. And in Project 2025, we're going to talk about the Department of Justice in this section. We're going to start talking about the Department of Justice. And remember, we talked about the Department of Labor in part one. We're going to talk about the Department of Justice. And I'm just going to plant this in case I miss it later. But public safety, you're going to see that Project 2025, I'm going to say, is a King of the North mentality right now, King of the North mentality. Um, they actually draw from the King of the South's playbook by saying, you know what, we need a public safety committee. And it's so they're just kind of borrowing from each other's interesting little tidbit. Okay. Now, this is from Spalding and Megan collection, and they rate, it says this, I saw that the two-horned beast, which we know is the United States, two-horned beast had a dragon's mouth. It had a dragon's mouth, and that his power was in his head. Okay, it's in his head, not his horns. That's very significant. And that the decree would come out of his mouth. Then I saw the mother of harlots. That's in Revelation. We call that the Vatican. That the mother was not the daughters, but separate and distinct from them. So many churches come out of the Vatican. Many churches come out of Catholicism. Many churches. Okay, so we're just looking at the mother of harlots and then the harlots, the apostate Protestants who are apostate by not following God's government, following other governments in the world. They're harlots. They're fornicating with other governments. They're saying, you know what, we want this government, and we're going to call ourselves Christian. And they're really taking on the Lord's name in vain when they do that. So they're breaking a commandment by taking his name as Christ-like and not acting Christ-like. A Christian. All right, continuing. She has had her day, and it is in the past. And her daughters, the Protestant sects, were the next to come onto the stage. Okay, that's what we're seeing. And act out the same mind that the mother had when she persecuted the saints. I saw that as the mother had been declining in power, the daughters had been growing, and soon they will exercise the power once exercised by the mother. There's several points I want you to take out of this. One, the two horns. The two horns, remember, were republicanism and Protestantism. And that's what our nation, the United States of America, was founded on. But by the time it starts speaking as a dragon, like Revelation talks about, 13, by the time this starts speaking as a dragon, the power is coming through the head. So it seems like there's been a merger or a breaking off of the horns, perhaps, and now it's coming out of the head. And then the mother of harlots was declining in her age, but the daughters have been rising up. And I will say that, remember, when the and I'm going to go back here just so you can see it. When you see that in 1798, when the King of the South, the French at this time, because the French were in power, so they inherited that title. When the French took over at the end of that 1798, at the end of the 1260 years, what was happening? The United States were coming onto a scene. The United States were coming on to the scene as a young nation. And our Constitution was made in the 1700s. So it's really prophetic timing. As one is going down, the daughters are coming up. Do you understand? So the Protestant nation is coming up. I think that's really what I wanted to go back and point out. All right. Now, the papacy. Papacy pushes back against communism. This is the second part of Daniel 11:40. So 11:40b says, "The king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horses and with many ships." And some people say this is future. I'm going to be in the camp that this actually started in 1989. And you can see Time magazine talks about the alliance between um, the Reagan administration, which is a Protestant nation, and the Vatican, the mother of harlots. I'm going to show a video here soon that that the reason why I think it was 1989 is because there's a documentary. There's many reasons, but to validate, there's d- a documentary called "A Divine Plan" that I show clips out of in a minute, and it talks about how Reagan and the Vatican worked together through the CIA. It was quite astonishing. Um, The King of the North, a closer look. So there's that book, Great Controversy again. And it says that Wycliffe kings and nobles are against the King of the North. It doesn't say that. That's my heading for this slide. But Wycliffe showed that he understood the papal assumption of authority over secular rulers was contrary to both reason and revelation. And the demands of the Pope had excited great indignation that the kings and the nobles united in denying the pontiff's claim of temporal authority. Now, remember, when Napoleon's General Berthier, in 1798, took down and gave that deadly wound to the Vatican, the mother of harlots, the first beast of Revelation. Now, when that happened to the first beast of Revelation, or the King of the North, then that was Napoleon's uh, King of the South. That was the King of the South taking temporal prosperity away from them. And they really could have wiped out the whole Vatican if they wanted to. They could have really done away with it under this reign of terror because Napoleon was pretty strong. However, they only took away the temporal. They said, look, we don't want you in our country at all. We could crush you. I'm paraphrasing, but we're not. We're going to let you just stick with the religion, even though we don't really care for your religion. We don't want it in here. And so um, that was that was the blow. And so they had other blows here. Effectual blow was struck against the papal supremacy in England. So the papacy was being rejected by so many people. That was the Protestant Reformation. And if you, uh, I'll give you that October 31st is the Protestant Reformation. It's interesting that's Protestant Reformation, but the Catholics, um, that feast actually gets more glory on that day, but it's that I don't see that as an accident either. Now, Wycliffe actually writes to the Pope, and he says, "No faithful man ought to follow either the Pope himself or any other holy man." men, but in such points as he hath followed the Lord Jesus Christ. For Peter and his sons of Zebedee, by desiring worldly honor, was contrary to Christ's steps, they did offend him, and that therefore in those errors they are not to be followed. So he's trying to correct the Pope and said the Pope ought to leave unto the secular powers all temporal dominion and rule. But what you're seeing right now is Christian nationalism is trying to take dominion of things that they're not supposed to take dominion of. Okay. And it goes on to say, you look, if I have erred, please show me. I will humbly submit myself even unto death if it is necessary or required. Now, here, I'm going to talk about Kennedy. Now, Kennedy, we know he was also a Catholic president of the United States of America. And I want to read this. It says, since the deadly wound of 1798, the papacy had been rebuilding its authority. They had a Catholic president in office. Um, and then the president, Kennedy, went to Houston on September 12th, 1960, and said, I am not a Catholic candidate for president. I am the Democratic Party candidate for president who also happens to be a Catholic. I do not speak for my church on pulpit matters, and the church does not speak for me. And we know what happened to him. He was assassinated. He was assassinated. Now, in Vatican II in the 1960s, in the same time frame, Vatican II was going on. And what was going on with them? They were in council for several years. You can see that it was under the head of two popes because one died, and you can see the start and end year. What the takeaway is from um, this council, this Vatican II, is that the word heretics was pretty much done away with, and uh, were they were wanting to call us Protestants separated brethren. So what is this? This they realize that condemning us is just going to push us further. So now they're trying to be nice and flatter, but still have authority over us. And I will say that during World War II, prior, this Pope John the 23rd, had given baptism certificates for Jews to be saved from death. So baptism of convenience. So this was controversial. You can look that up later. And this is the Pope that always stopped and blessed the Jews on their Sabbath. It was their Sabbath. And he said, I am your brother Joseph. Now, if you know anything about Joseph and his brothers, Joseph, everybody bowed down to Joseph in the end. Okay, so he's claiming that reverence that Joseph actually was given by God. Now, the Pope John Paul II and 23rd John 23 were both canonized on the same day. You can see that they are both the man of the year at some point. But then I want to go to Reagan and Pope John Paul II. And both were avowed against communism. Remember, King of the South, what did Egypt, who was Egypt, who are the French? So again, you can follow that train of who was, how the King of the South went and gathered their fame through the hundreds and hundreds of years as well. But here we see that these two joined together. So Protestantism reaches over the gulf to clasp hands with Romanism to take down Mr. Gorbachev, and the Cold War was ended. And I'm going to play a video in just a moment. And it's from the documentary, The Divine Plan. Okay, so the video's not going to um, work because it is copyrighted. So when I went to upload it to YouTube, it's not going to do it. So I had to cut it out. But what I want you to take away from this divine plan, if you don't get a chance to watch it, is that President Reagan, when he was in office, or actually before he was in office, he was running for election, he said, the Pope is the key, the Pope is the key, the Pope is the key, and he wanted to make the papacy, the Vatican, allies with the United States. Well, he did that, and he started sharing CIA classified information even before, my understanding is, even before he was president. So he then made them ally. He reached over the Gulf and clasped hands with the Vatican as the leader of the Protestant church. And they used solidarity, which is a union movement in Poland. And it's here in the United States, matter of fact, solidarity. And in Project 2025, there are lots of union opportunities they have put in there. They have also said in this documentary, The Divine Plan, that the future is clear, that freedom was going to be given, and that's not the case. It's not really the end game for the King of the North. The main thing I want you to take away from this is that in 1989, the news said when the wall fell or communist fell, it says atheistic communism meets the vicar of Christ. And so, very prophetic headline there. And then at the end, they say that 1989 issue was round one of the Cold War, and that now with Putin and the current affair issues with Putin, we are in round two. So the point is, the takeaway is the King of the North and King of the South. The job is not done. The King of the North has not taken out the King of the South just yet. And in Project 2025, the King of the North, we will call the Vatican or Catholics, want to they want to take out communism for good and even bring in legislation. So that's what I want you to take away. And I'm sorry the video is copyrighted, but that makes sense. But I would rather just do this way and let the whole video be seen versus having it blocked where people of the world could not see this video. All right. Bye bye. All right. I hope you enjoyed that divine plan introduction. You can go watch the whole thing, but I want to point out that the Pope is the key. The Pope is the key. The Pope is the key, is what Ronald Reagan said. Allies, and he started sharing classified CIA documents with him. The Solidarity movement, that's a union in Poland. They are in the United States as well. Solidarity movement, and you will see that unions are really big in Project 2025. It was interesting the speed of the fall. Then they talked about 1989, but I want to end with this, and you can hear, and they said, we won round one of the Cold War. Remember, they just said that. We won one of the Cold War. And so winning round one, and then they talk about Putin, and how they are not finished. And they are correct. They are not finished. Now, when you look at how the Vatican and the United States have their relationship, what I will say is the United States does not need the Vatican to be the superpower. What we what we need is we need them to not be in the government, trying to use our government against us, and that's really what they have done. So the King of the South and the King of the North have come over to the United States and moved in. They moved into those two horns, and so what I'm going to introduce to you is the idea that the King of the North, Vatican, has really done an amazing job um, implanting themselves or infiltrating, whatever you want to call it, advocating for their themselves in the Protestantism, right? The horn of the Protestantism. And the King of the South, communism, has really implanted themselves and infiltrated themselves in um, the other horn, republicanism. And this is why we see the increase in separation of church and state. And so there was we then polarized. So I was interested to see that, you know, how they dressed everyone in this documentary. Look at how these people are dressed. Red and blues and purples. You got some grays there, or red and purple, gold and pearls. I want to read something to you in Revelation 17:6 about the mother of harlots. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And so basically fornication in Book of Revelation is, are you really saying you are for God's government and you're really fornicating with other governments? That's really it's spiritual. Um, so I want to show you this. So there's purples. Look at the purples and the lavenders and blues. And then you've got your bishop and cardinal represented. And then you have your hint, your filters. You got your red filters and purple filters. And if you were to watch President Trump's um, acceptance speech on election day 2024, election night 2024, beside Kamala Harris's, you would see that the Republicans actually had red and purple in there. I don't think it was an accident. All right. Well, in 2015, Pope came to the America, United States of America, and he spoke about four people. And it was Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, Dorothy Day, and Thomas Merton. So we're going to take a deep dive in who these people really are or were. Now, Lincoln. First, we know Lincoln as Abraham Lincoln. He was our president, and he had something interesting to say about the Roman Catholic Church. And he said, do not pretend to be a prophet, but though not a prophet, I see a dark cloud on the horizon, and that cloud is coming from Rome. It is filled with tears of blood. The motive power is secreted behind the thick walls of the Vatican and colleges and schools of the Jesuits, the convents and the nuns, and the confessional boxes of Rome. So, this was during a time when there were abolitionists. We are to be abolitionists. And what are we abolitionists of? We're abolitionists to abolish the dominion of humans called slavery. So we are abolitionists. We do not want people to be slaves. He went on to say, well, at what point shall we expect the approach of danger? Shall we expect some transatlantic military grant to step the ocean and crush us at a blow? Never. Never. All the armies of Europe and Asia, Africa combined, with all the treasures of earth, our own excepted, in the military chest, with Bonaparte for the commander, could not by force take a drink from the Ohio, make a track on the Blue Ridge in a trial of 1,000 years. At what point then is this approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up among us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be the author and the finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide. And that's what I'm telling you. I'm telling you that this is springing up. Our suicide is springing up among us in our two horns. We have been asleep at the rim of our country. Now, here's a book, Engineer Corps of Hell, who says that why Abraham was a martyr president and the Jesuits of Illinois were conspiring against him. And if you look at the white lines here, you could see that there was that. Well, let me go to the top. It says Abraham Lincoln calls for Archbishop Hughes. He says, I have invited you here as the chief representative and Episcopal dignitary of the Roman Catholic Church in the United States. Various religious denominations in the South have, in many places, openly declared their sympathy with the rebellion. He listed the Protestant Episcopal Church of the Confederate States, Methodist Episcopal Church South, Southern Baptist, and others. And if you look at what's underlined, it goes on to say, acting under, listen to this, acting under an implied, if not direct authority from the Pope. So from the Pope himself, who's declared sympathy with the rebellion. Now, I'm from the South. I am from the South. And you learned a little bit more about me in the part one. So we'll disclose here and there. And so look, I can't hide my accent. And even though I've tried, I just can't. So I'm from the South. My family have lived here for hundreds of years in the South. So I know who I am. And I'm not talking about my folk down here, but it is what it is. They were, they were ruled by the Catholics. Okay, and I'm from Louisiana, so we've got a lot of Roman Catholics down there. All right. So the next turn of the wheel gave Lincoln the nomination of presidency. Listen to this. Then, from that very moment, came the releasing of every Roman Catholic from his allegiance to the American government. Now, let me tell you, was this a political move? Was this a government move? Or was this a religious move as though we want to, um, get you to heaven at all cost? So in August 18, 2023, this is a fairly recent article. It says that the Jesuits blast seizure of the university in Nicaragua over terrorism charge. So basically, the liberal government has accused the King of the North representatives as being terrorists. And so the fight is everywhere. The fight is not just in the United States. So if you're seeing, listen, if you're seeing other governments fighting the same thing we're fighting, it's because that's real. It is real. It is real. But the United States is where Protestantism really thrives. So prophetically speaking, the United States had to have been the last superpower, and we will remain the last superpower, prophetically speaking, along with the Vatican. And we will do the Vatican's business. We will enforce it. That's what we are for as a nation. We're not for it, like pro, but that's what the prophecies say we will do. All right, Martin Luther King. He talked about Martin Luther King, Pope John Paul II. I'm sorry. Was it Pope John Paul? The last Pope. The one that came in 2015. Anyways, Francis. And so he talked about Martin Luther King Sr. Now, who is he? He was a Protestant preacher. He was the father of MLK Jr. And he visited Germany, and the senior did visited Germany. He was really moved by all the Dark Ages social injustices and moved by Martin Luther. So when he came back home, he actually he got his name changed to Martin Luther King Sr. and renamed his son, who was 5 years old at the time, and his son's name became Martin Luther King Jr. And we know he was killed also. But Martin Luther was a Protestant. He was against the exploitation of the poor. He objected to the Catholic Church and the indulgences. He also rejected that Catholics could forgive sin, or any man could forgive sin. Only the God of heaven could forgive sin. Pope Francis talked about Dorothy Day and Thomas Merton, who was an anarchist and who was social justice and wanting to redistribute the wealth. And I have a video here I want to show you. This is the Foundation, Kevin Roberts, the president, and he actually served. The kind of person who That's not actually a video right here, but the next one is going to be a video. And but he served as president of Wyoming Catholic College from 2013 to 2016. All right, I'm going to show you this video. Here we go. The kind of person who will come into the next conservative administration is going to be governed by one principle, and that is destroying the grasp that political elites and unelected technocrats have over the average person. That the agenda that every single member of the administration needs to have is to compile a list of everything that's ever been proposed at the World Economic Forum and object all of them wholesale. Anyone not prepared to do that and take away this power of the unelected bureaucrats and give it back to the American people is unprepared to be part of the next conservative administration. What's best for the American citizen. The much bigger threat is the Chinese Communist Party, and not. All right. Did you hear? He said the bigger threat is the Chinese Communist Party. There we go. The kind of person who will come into the next conservative administration is going to be governed by one principle, and that is destroying the grasp that political elites and unelected technocrats have over the average person. That the agenda that every single member of the administration needs to have is to compile a list of everything that's ever been proposed at the World Economic Forum and object all of them wholesale. Anyone not prepared to do that and take away this power of the unelected bureaucrats and give it back to the. All right, I think I played that twice, but nonetheless, you got the point. So, the sum of the King of the North is that they claim temporal authority, not just religious authority. That since 1798, they have worked towards regaining world dominance. They are in it for the long game. Their encyclicals and bulls add onto each other, they build onto each other. They use the religious authorities and the secular authorities, whichever one they prefer or need to use. It is a government of its own. They have ambassadors, even. They have their own zip code and a lot of other things that make them separate from churches. They are not loyal to any government. You see that they will absolve everyone from their own birth government if they are Catholic. They have been rejected by kings, presidents, and religious leaders worldwide. They have partnered with any government it needs to. They are in every government. And now, with the false prophet, which is the United States, they have infiltrated in the last superpower, and they've done a good job that in the 1900s and the 2000s. They have funded both sides of most wars. Some people say that they funded all the wars of every side. And then they've been accused of assassinating world leaders in every age. They flatter people when they need to. So there's a lot that can be said about the King of the North. So let's take a closer look of the King of the South. This is very short. They have atheistic views. They reject Christianity. They accept their idols and other spiritual feeling stuff and purposes, but they don't accept the living God. It has made steady strides against the King of the North. Um, they were the ones who actually um, ended the temporal power in 1798. It is also an end time power, and the King of the South will eventually join with the King of the North to fight against God's true people um, right before the Christ comes. That's where we're headed. And if you know anything about the Hegelian dialect, look, the Hegelian dialectic, picture a pendulum, right? And so the left hits, and the right hits, and the left, and the right. And so it goes, it just beats up everybody in the center. And the goal is to introduce a thesis and then introduce an antithesis or antithesis and then have them the left and a right. And that's why you can't have a third party with any leverage in the United States, because third parties interfere with the Hegelian dialectic. And so that's why, um, Robert F. Kennedy, if you have his book or don't have his book yet, here we go. Not sure where it's gonna. Anyways, Vaccine Injured is one of his books. He just, he says some good stuff, but he just switched parties. People are switching parties. This Hegelian dialectic is pretty strong, but their goal is to synthesize. So you got a thesis, an antithesis, and the goal is to synthesize. They just need something to synthesize over. And what more can they synthesize over than if fireballs started coming out of the sky, hitting Nashville or any other city? Or what about any other natural disaster that is like setting precedents? Precedents in the timing, precedents in the location, precedents in the duration, intensity, or the frequency. So I believe that they are going to synthesize over natural disasters, and the left is going to say, hey, this is because of man. And the right is going to say, hey, this is because of God. And so they may differ on the source, but neither one can get past the fact. So I believe that's where we're headed. That's not part of this study, though. Okay, so the second beast from lamb to dragon. And again, there's the formatting got off in this presentation, but that's all right. Revelation 13:11 says, and I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. That's significant. And he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. So we've got several things going on here. And I want to show you uh, this is actually the United States. This is actually the United States. Yeah, you can see that. This is the United States. This is an old drawing from the 1800s replica when this actually was discovered. And I think I've mentioned in part one, but I'll mention it now, that when were coming out of the Dark Ages, it was dark for a reason because the Vatican had locked up the Bibles. Even Martin Luther had been a priest or a monk for many years before he realized that there was more books to the Bible. He didn't even know how many books were in a Bible until he saw a Bible that was chained to the pulpit, and he just stood there and learning the word of God, standing there at the pulpit because it was chained to the pulpit. It was written in language that the commoners couldn't read. if they could read at all, because they were commoners. So, there was a lot of truth that was lost out of the 1260 years, just so much truth. And so we had, as a people, as a church people, we had to relearn a lot of things because the Catholics had really um, told us a bunch of lies. And so the Protestants had to go and learn for themselves. And you wonder why there's so many different churches. Well, because some of them had special things that they relearned when they were studying. Like the Baptists learned a full immersion baptism, right? Right. The Methodists had learned methodology, methods of studying. So there were lots of things, and there's lots of counterfeits too. But nonetheless, um, that's a reason why they just kind of the people just kind of stopped learning. They just kind of held on to that truth and they didn't advance it. Well, in 1798, you could see there's a map, and you see this sea of people. Look to the east, the old world. It's very, very populated. Lots of people there, lots of people, and we call that the sea of people. The sea of people. Even the uh, Vatican says the Holy See. They are over the sea of people. And then compared to the West, look at how little uh, populated it is. And so it's not a sea, it's pretty desolate. And that's why the Bible codes that into uh, the earth. The earth is pretty dry with people. All right. So let's look at this second beast, the United States of America. The rise of the second beast in Revelation, it is said in that famous book from 1888. Mr. Wesley, in his notes on Revelation 13, written in 1754, says of the two-horned beast, he said this. Listen to this. He said, "This two-horned beast, he is not yet come, though he cannot be far off. For he is to appear at the end of the 42 months of the first beast." Now, remember that chart of the 42 months, chart with the yellow box, and it had the 1260 years arch, and it said time times and a half a time. Well, it also says 42 months. It's the same 1260 years prophecy. I can email me and I can give you the quick breakdown of that. But nonetheless, even Mr. Wesley said, you know what? There's another beast about to rise because this 1260 years is about to be over. And it was over in 1798. And our nation, the United States of America, was rising up. So this was prophesied. The United States was prophesied. And in Revelation 13:11, and I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. And that was what we were reading, but I'm going to read it here. Coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. Now, this was a 1880s replica. You can see that it's a lamb with large fangs and the dragon's breath coming out. And this basically, some historians say that the United States was speaking as a dragon in when it was promoting slavery and fighting for slavery. The Vatican was helping the South fight to keep dominion of the people and keep slavery. And so at this point, we definitely were speaking like a dragon, and we were not following suit as the lamb-like nation we had rose being a Christ-like nation. Now, I do know we've always had slavery here. Not well, that's debatable how early we had slavery. We didn't have slaves too early, but we had slaves pretty early on, and the dominion of the people. Now, what I would say is this. We have had, and I said this in part one, I believe, we've had to redo or add some amendments to our Constitution for the civil service positions, the veterans of um, the Civil War of the 1860s. We've had to help free slaves. We've had to have an amendment for blacks to vote. We've had to have an amendment for religion. We've had to have an amendment for women suffrage and women's voting. So we've had to add amendments through the years to make that Constitution fair for everyone. And it's still the best Constitution in the world, but they know that. And so when I just kind of reminds me of when Daniel was, and look, we're looking at Daniel, but when Daniel, the wise men said, you know what, we just cannot get Daniel on anything. We've audited his books, everything is perfect. The only thing we can get them on is we can get him on. Well, he's pretty dedicated to his God. So we know he's going to pray to his God. So let's just go ahead and make a law that he can't pray to any other God for 30 days. And so, well, he disobeyed that, and King Darius put him in the lion's den because, well, the law was made and it couldn't be changed. So that principle of making laws to catch people in their new sin, they're now criminals, kind of reminds me of that evil principle of what the King of the South and King of the North has done to this great nation of America. They came over and they used our Constitution against us. Because, see, think about it. And the Puritans, and this is off the cuff, so this is extra, no cost. And so the Puritans, at first they were like, you know what, we don't want any Catholics. We don't want any Catholics because we know what they're all about. And you know what? That wasn't the spirit of Christ. And so the spirit of Christ is no, um, everybody can own land. And just because you are Catholic doesn't mean you can't own land and you can't vote. Or if you're not Christian, you can't vote and you can't own land. And that's what they were doing at first. And so they improved their ways, but every time they became more Christian, it meant for them to be less of a dictator, and that allowed the King of the North, King of the South mentality to come in and use our laws against us. And here we are. We have the Democrat and the Republican Party both infiltrated, fighting against each other. And well, here we are in 2024. Okay, the horn is represented. The horn represents a kingdom, right? We know this. I've already said this. Or as a component part of the kingdom, as in Daniel 7:7, 8, 24, and 25. Lamb-like horns would indicate youthfulness, innocence, and gentleness. The two horns represent the two leading principles of the government, right? Civil and religious. Civil and religious. Now, do you remember that the Divine Plan documentary I just showed? It talked about solidarity. And in Project 2025, boy, the unions are all in there. So this is a Polish trade union, Solidarity. It takes the center right and center left. You see that over to the left, that red arrow to the left side of the slide. And then you can see that bottom right arrow. It's a Catholic social teaching. This is from Wikipedia. And so this is about the American Solidarity Union, or the party. And if you didn't know, um, I don't know about your ballot, but my ballot in Arkansas had a Solidarity candidate. And I forget the last name. It's a Polish name, Ski, SKI. I forget the name. I just saw that today. I mean, I paid attention to it today on November 12th. I took a picture of my um what I was voting for. I didn't vote for people, but I did take a picture of who all the candidates were. But nonetheless, when you remember what I said about the Hegelian dialectic, of a thesis, antithesis, and you're beating up everything and in the middle and you want to synthesize, well, the solidarity movement is how the unions are going to help synthesize everybody to the center. So that's where we're headed, guys. That's where we're headed. This is from 1917, and it says, "The hand that will rule the world, one big union." And that is correct. So what's our next step? You know, we have these verses. I want to remind you, when Yeshua therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again into the mountain alone. We can't force Jesus into um, the government. We can't force him into the government. His kingdom is not of this world. He already won dominion of this world at the cross, and we are looking to go to heaven. So that's the government we're supposed to be ambassadors for. My goal for you is to see that uniting yourself with the left side or the right side, or uniting yourself in the synthesize, you will be fornicating with other governments and not loyal to God's government. You can't fornicate with another government and still call yourself a loyal wife of Christ. You're the bride of Christ if you are Christian. And if you're not, then I'm just introducing this to you. So, so Yeshua's mission transcends temporal concerns here. We are at the end of the Protestant Reformation, and there's about to be a revival of this Protestant Reformation, because when people see what's coming in Project 2025, there's gonna be another reign of terror. And there's gonna be two Sabbaths you're gonna have to get to know. You're going to have to remember that there's the seventh day Sabbath from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. And think about it, there's the millennial Sabbath and 6,000 years. So 6,000 years, we know a day, 1,000 years is like a day with the Lord. Don't we know that? If you're Christian, we know that 1,000 years is like a day with the Lord. And so if the earth has been here for 6,000 years, what's about to happen? We're about to have that millennial Sabbath. And the Catholics do teach that millennial Sabbath is going to start on earth. It's not. It's not. It's God is not going to give the enemy any more time on this planet and give the enemy any time of his Sabbath. So God is going to keep his holy Sabbath, which is that 7,000 years, and he's going to let us keep it with him in the heavens above. So I know that might be just an introduction to you, but ask me anything, email me, ask me anything. Okay, the heavenly kingdom, right? In whom the God of this world hath blinded the minds, and them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them. So there is a God of the fallen world, and if you want to do link yourself with anything of this world, including any of the governments that literally are about to fall in Revelation 18. Look, you're linking yourself not with the Christ above. So there's two choices. We have Yeshua, the Son of God, the only begotten Son, or we have the devil, Satan. And so Yeshua teaches us that there's a weekly Sabbath day, sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. And Satan says, hey, I got my own day. This is a counterfeit. God has his mark. Well, this is a mark of my allegiance. So this is going to mark us of who we are. Yeshua has the millennial in heaven for the righteous. And look, if you believe that you're going to stay on earth for 1,000 years and you're going to reject the heaven above, well, I hate to say, And this is not funny, but you will be on earth, but you're not going to be living because the wicked stay on earth dead. No one's going to bury them. Um, so there's a study in just that, there's a millennial study I can give you. The early rain and latter rain is what Yeshua tells us to ask for every day. But Satan says, you know what? I have emotionalism and spiritualism as a counterfeit. Follow that. Yeshua says, I've got a spiritual world to inherit. And Satan says, you know what? I've got a temporal world. I want you to talk dominion language. Yeshua says there's war within ourselves. We got to overcome sin. Satan says, no, no, war against other people. Yeshua says there's love, righteousness, and religious liberty. Satan says, no, there's bias, prejudice, and religious persecution. So we're going to have to, this is how you're going to tell the difference between the two governments, the true government and the false government. So, Second Thessalonians 2:11 and 12. I'm not going to go through all of this, but really, there's so many different types of irrational thoughts and or if you want to say delusion. And Second Thessalonians 2:11 and 12 says, and for this cause God shall send them strong delusion that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believe not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. And I want to go through here and you can see the verse broken down. You can stop and you can pause this slideshow and look, really study this. Really study this. There's a bunch of irrational thoughts here. Irrational thoughts, the red ones, maybe, and some of the black ones too. You can see that this is just all in the King of the North and King of the South. They're so narcissistic. They are so narcissistic. Here we go. Sorry that I haven't been changing this, but that's your verse you can look at. And here's your irrational thoughts here as well. And I wanted to tell a story. This is my family. I blacked out my daughter's face. And basically, I was at a church years ago, and on one side of the church, this one man kept coming to church and talking bad about the seventh day Sabbath. And I'm thinking, why are you even here? Every single Sabbath, he would tell me the Sabbath is not really holy, et cetera, et cetera. And he was married to a Sabbath keeper that was going to that church. And he was just really talking bad about Sabbath. Well, about a year, I got tired of that and I moved to the right side of the church. And there was a man talking bad about prophecy and a prophet. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just so done with these people. And I was like, I just had to set boundaries with them. And this is what I'm telling you in a quick scheme of things. We have to set boundaries with the right side and the left side because they're going to both talk bad about the other one. It is not okay. We are not here to talk bad about anyone, but only to talk and lift up Jesus. Because the King of the North, the real King of the North, is about to stand. So I want you to remember that we are to ask for the early and latter rain always. If you have any questions, reach out to me. This is our ministry's email. And I'm going to end with a quick word of prayer, and then I will uh, see you in part 3. Father in heaven, thank you for the extra vocal strength you gave me to finish this presentation. And we did take a little longer than we would if we were in a live audience. But Father, we just like really presenting the truth. We love it. We thank you for all of this. And this is just part of it. You already know that. I pray for all those that are watching, Lord, and those uh, I hope that they are inspired to share this. Father, I ask this in the name of your son, Yeshua. Amen. Okay, guys, you take care. Bye.